Let's go back to our top story. Those false positive COVID cases reclassified in Melbourne overnight. As we've mentioned, these were two of the so-called fleeting contact cases that have worried health authorities, forcing Melbourne's extended lockdown.
For more, I'm joined by clinical biochemist and CEO of peak testing body Pathology Technology Australia, Dean Whiting. Good morning, Dean. Welcome to News Breakfast.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning.
Dean, I'm hoping that you can clear a few things up for us and we'll learn a little bit along the way. How do false positives end up happening?
So, Lisa, first of all, I'd just like to say that Australians can have utmost confidence in the testing technology and the laboratories doing their testing. But there is a rate of false positives and false negatives with many of the tests that we do. And in the case of PCR testing for COVID, there's two general buckets into which false positives fall. The first is the lab error or a mix-up of samples or a contamination of samples somewhere between the collection of the sample and through to the measurement. The second bucket is a little more complex. PCR is extremely sensitive and will pick up remnant RNA from the virus many days or even months after the virus has resolved and is no longer infectious. So the second bucket really is a false positive where you can measure viral RNA on an individual, but they're no longer infectious. They've passed their infectious phase.
Back up a step and tell me the PCR test, is that what everyone's using around Australia? And what is the PCR test?
Sure. So there are two general tests that are available to detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus. The first is the PCR. So that is polymerase chain reaction. Effectively, what it does is take tiny quantities of the viral RNA, they convert it into a DNA strand and then multiply that up many, many times, millions of times, so that it can be measured by a spectroscopic or a fluorescent method. So PCR, polymerase chain reaction, it refers to the enzyme used to do this multiplication. The second type of detection system is an antigen detection system. So we're looking there for the protein that coats the virus. And the antigen test you may have heard about are relatively quick and relatively easy to do. So there's two different types of tests to detect the virus.
So one's up the nose, the other one's saliva, isn't it?
Well, no, you can collect samples in multiple ways. So from the back of the throat, which is the place where the virus likes to live. So that's called a nasopharyngeal swab. There's also an oropharyngeal, so that's through the mouth to the back of the throat. There's also neonasal, so right into the turbines in the front of the nose. And then there's saliva. Now, each of those have different positivity rates based on the likelihood of finding virus in those locations.
So where does it leave us in Melbourne? And you're a Melbourne citizen, so you're in lockdown along with the rest of us?
Yep. Well, look, it's interesting. False positives and false negatives both occur. The technology is very sound, and the manufacturers of the technology constantly review the performance of their technology through preventative actions, constantly updating. Laboratories, I worked in laboratories for many years and instituted one of the first quality systems in a large hospital laboratory. So I know firsthand that the quality systems in laboratories are excellent. And in fact, it's because of the quality systems in the laboratories that we probably found these two false positives. So false positives and false negatives are inevitable. They do happen and they will continue to happen. But we rely on the expertise of our laboratoriums and on the technology to be able to detect these errors and prevent them from occurring too often.
All right. You'd be hoping maybe we might have an early lockdown lift because of it.
Well, yes, given the reproductive cycle of the virus, and given that this one's probably about 30% more infectious than the ones we've seen in the past, we may be here maybe another week or two. That's what I'm hearing from the epidemiologists anyway. So let's hope, hey?
Oh, well, that's not good news. Because there has been some debate over whether this was as ferocious as a strain as had been put forward, and the idea that these two that have now been negated, that are the false positives, were the ones of the fleeting contact, that there had been a suggestion then from some people, including epidemiologist Tony Blakely, that it would be reason to lift the lockdown a little earlier.
Yeah, so what they call the R factor. The R factor is the number of people that a single person can infect. With the earlier forms of strains of the virus, the R factor was about 2.4, 2.5. So one person could, on average, infect 2.5 people. This strain, the so-called now Kappa strain, is about 3.5. So it's about 30% more infectious. So we do have to be a little bit more cautious about how we go with this. Look, I can't predict what the health authorities will say. It would be great to have a gradual reduction in the restrictions. I'd love to get out and get my latte again. It would be wonderful.
Dean Whiting, great to have you on the program. Thanks for the explanation of what we're facing.